Princess Catherine entered the private chamber, expecting a difficult family conversation. Instead, King Charles placed a sealed constitutional instrument before her and calmly revealed that the monarchy would no longer operate under his direct command. The authority had been transferred. The decisions, the household, the future of the crown, all of it now rested with William and Catherine. She stared at the final signature, unable to speak, because this was not preparation for power. It was power arriving without warning. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles watched her read the page again. William sat beside her, silent, while a constitutional advisor remained by the door. Windsor Castle was not hosting a family discussion. It was witnessing a transfer of command. The fictional instrument of royal delegation, a formal document passing day-to-day royal authority from the sovereign to chosen representatives, gave the couple control over the household, official engagements, senior appointments, public strategy, and preparations for the next reign. Catherine reached the paragraph naming her joint guardian of the crown's continuity. Her breathing slowed. She lowered the document and asked whether the arrangement was temporary. Charles answered with one word: no. The reply struck harder than any speech. She had spent years supporting the institution, protecting her children, and preparing the future king for duty. But she had never expected to become one of the monarchy's principal decision-makers while the king still occupied the throne. William reacted with colder restraint. He kept his face composed, yet his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair when he reached the clause surrendering authority over senior appointments. That detail mattered because those appointments determined who controlled access, information, and influence around the crown. His father was not merely sharing work. He was giving away the machinery that allowed a monarch to shape the institution from within. Charles admitted that the plan had been prepared in secret for several weeks. Camilla had not seen the final instrument. Anne had not been consulted. Most senior courtiers knew nothing beyond fragments of legal meetings. The secrecy stunned Catherine, because it showed that the sovereign had deliberately avoided the family structure he was now asking her to command. Catherine looked at him and demanded to know what had become so dangerous that delay now threatened the crown more than change. The monarch did not answer. He reached beneath the first document, drew out a second red folder, and pushed it across the table. The first document gave Catherine power, but the second would reveal the personal cost, and why Charles believed only she and William could prevent the monarchy from breaking apart. Power did not unite the three figures seated around that table. It exposed everything they had been trying not to say. Charles saw the transfer as protection. William saw it as a burden delivered years too soon. Catherine saw something more frightening, a family decision disguised as constitutional necessity. Behind the official language stood a father confronting decline, a son facing destiny, and a woman suddenly expected to hold both men together while carrying the monarchy on her shoulders. Charles remained seated as the silence deepened. He had become convinced that uncertainty at the heart of the royal household was weakening discipline, encouraging rival factions, and allowing private disputes to interfere with public duty. The royal household, the network of offices and staff that manages the sovereign's work, schedule, and public responsibilities, could not survive if different branches continued pulling in opposite directions. For him, this was no longer a matter of pride. It was a threat to the crown's ability to function. William understood the danger, but not the timing. He had spent his life preparing to become king, yet every lesson had assumed a gradual transition. Now his father still wore the crown while surrendering practical control. That division mattered, because the king would remain the public symbol of authority, while the future monarch would make the decisions behind it. The arrangement placed the prince in power without giving him the final identity that usually came with it. Catherine rose when the meeting paused. She walked toward the window, pressed 2 fingers against her wedding ring, and quietly told William that their children's lives would change the moment the decision became public. George would be watched as the young heir. Charlotte and Louis would lose another layer of privacy. She feared that accepting power would make her appear eager to replace Charles, but refusing it could leave her husband isolated inside a divided institution. Charles heard every word. He admitted that remaining the visible sovereign while giving away daily command would be humiliating. He would still greet leaders, approve state duties, and carry the title. Yet others would control the machinery around him. Still, he said personal pride could no longer decide whether the monarchy survived intact. Catherine looked again at the document and noticed how sharply it reduced Camilla's influence over staffing and communications. The queen consort would not see this as a technical change. She would feel authority disappearing from her household, and that loss could turn private pain into open conflict. William finally revealed that his father had warned him days earlier that a structural change was coming through a private recorded conversation. He had expected new duties, not equal authority for Catherine. The decision shocked him because it transformed his wife from trusted support into a direct force over senior courtiers and competing royal offices. Charles then broke the silence with a darker truth. The decision had not begun with illness, succession planning, or public pressure. It began at a state reception months earlier, when one private act convinced him that control of the monarchy was slipping away. The transfer appeared sudden, but its true beginning lay inside that crowded palace reception, where a hidden breach turned fear into action. Everyone remembered the reception for its music, formal speeches, and carefully arranged smiles. Charles remembered something else. Near the end of the evening, he discovered that a sensitive royal announcement had been altered without his approval, and that 2 separate palace offices had issued conflicting instructions in his name. What looked like a minor administrative failure was, to the king, evidence of something far more dangerous. The monarchy was no longer obeying a single center of command. Charles was greeting Commonwealth representatives when his private secretary approached with 2 folded papers. The first carried the wording approved by the sovereign's office. The second had already been circulated through another household channel and claimed to reflect his wishes. A Commonwealth reception, a formal gathering bringing together representatives from nations linked through the Commonwealth, was supposed to display unity. Instead, it became the moment the king discovered that unity inside his own institution was already collapsing. The private secretary spoke quietly and showed him the altered passage. Catherine's name had been inserted as the future leader of a major royal initiative involving the younger generation's duties. She had not been consulted. She had not approved the wording. Yet someone had placed her at the center of an internal power struggle, using her public trust to strengthen a decision the monarch had never authorized. Charles folded both versions with deliberate care. He placed them inside his jacket and continued greeting guests as though nothing had happened. That restraint mattered because any visible reaction could have turned a private breach into an international embarrassment. Yet silence carried its own danger. If competing offices could issue commands in his name, then staff, governments, and the public could no longer know who truly spoke for the crown. Anne saw the change immediately. She watched her brother's expression harden, noticed how quickly he ended one conversation, and followed when he left the reception. Inside a private room, she asked what had happened. He placed both papers on the table. The Princess Royal read them twice, then told him the truth no courtier had dared to say aloud. Anne warned that overlapping households had become competing courts. A royal household is the staff and offices supporting each senior family member. But these teams were no longer simply arranging duties. They were fighting for access, appointments, influence, and control of public messages. She told Charles that family loyalty was being turned into political leverage, and unless he created one clear chain of command, the institution would keep dividing from within. Charles felt the betrayal personally. Someone close enough to the royal machinery had assumed his approval could be bypassed, manufactured, or claimed after the fact. Disagreement could be managed. Disobedience hidden behind his name could not. That same night, he began drafting the delegation plan. He did not choose to pull more power toward himself. He chose to move operational control to William and Catherine, before the rival factions became permanent. Catherine opened the red folder and discovered the reception was only the beginning. Documented accounts showed repeated attempts to influence appointments, engagements, and public strategy, some linked to people she had trusted. She had entered the meeting believing she was being promoted. Now she understood that Charles was asking her to confront a network operating from inside the family itself. Catherine closed the red folder and pushed it back across the table. For the first time since entering the room, her shock gave way to anger. Charles had handed her enormous authority, but he had also placed her directly in the path of every resentment, rivalry, and private ambition hidden inside the royal household. She demanded to know whether he had chosen her because he trusted her, or because he needed someone else to fight a battle he no longer wished to face. Charles removed his glasses and set them carefully beside the documents. He allowed the silence to stretch until it became its own answer. The royal household, the network of offices and staff managing the sovereign's duties, appointments, and public role, was already divided into rival centers of influence. Catherine told him that complete control could not be presented as an honor when the evidence showed an institution turning against itself. William leaned forward and asked his father to reduce the authority being transferred. He warned that full control would make every decision look like an early seizure of power. The future king had prepared for duty, but not for ruling the machinery of the crown while the monarch still sat across from him. That distinction mattered, because public trust depended on the appearance of continuity, not a hidden struggle between one reign and the next. Catherine's anger sharpened. She said the decision could damage her relationship with Camilla, place new strain on her marriage, and expose George, Charlotte, and Louis to another wave of scrutiny. Every appointment she approved could be called ambition. Every disagreement could be framed as a family coup. She had spent years protecting stability, yet Charles was now asking her to become the face of disruption. Charles finally answered with force. He told her she had calmed rooms others inflamed, preserved relationships others treated as weapons, and understood public trust better than many advisors paid to defend it. He admitted that William's loyalty could be exploited because the prince still hoped family affection might solve institutional conflict. Catherine, however, had proved she could separate love from duty when the crown demanded it. William turned toward her and changed his position. He supported her demand that they receive real authority to reform the competing household structure. Without that power, the transfer would be a burden without protection, leaving them responsible for chaos they were forbidden to correct. Catherine then asked the question Charles had avoided. Did Camilla know her office would lose control over senior appointments and communications? The king looked down and admitted she did not. The silence that followed carried more danger than the argument before it. Catherine set her first condition. She would accept the transfer only if Charles personally told every senior family member that the decision was his. No one would accuse William or his wife of forcing the crown from his hands. Charles agreed, then added that one person had already discovered the plan. The chamber door opened before Catherine could ask who. Camilla entered, saw the documents, and stopped. The decision had survived Catherine's resistance, but it now faced the woman whose power had changed before she had even been consulted. Camilla did not raise her voice when she saw the documents. That made the moment more dangerous. She read the first page, glanced at Catherine, and understood immediately that the balance of power had changed. The king remained sovereign, yet the machinery surrounding him, the diaries, appointments, household access, public priorities, and private channels of influence, would now answer elsewhere. For Camilla, this was not simply administrative reform. It felt like removal carried out inside her own marriage. Camilla placed the document on the table and kept one hand resting on it. The Lord Chamberlain's office, the department that coordinates major royal duties, ceremonies, and household operations, would now answer to William and Catherine. They would approve senior staffing recommendations, set engagement priorities, coordinate the separate royal households, and decide which family members represented the crown. That power mattered, because control over schedules and access often shaped influence long before the public saw any formal decision. Charles watched his wife's face change and tried to speak as both husband and monarch. He told her the transfer was not a punishment. She pointed to the clauses ending her household's independent control over communications and appointments, then asked whether he had lost confidence in her. Her voice remained steady, but the question exposed a wound deeper than anger. Catherine did not look away. She told Camilla that she had neither requested nor expected the authority, but she would not apologize for accepting a responsibility the king believed was necessary. The princess understood that the transfer could destroy trust between them, yet refusing it would leave the competing offices untouched, and William trapped between loyalty to his father and pressure from every side. Charles then disclosed through a documented internal review that several senior courtiers had urged Camilla to strengthen an independent office around the sovereign. They believed William's household was preparing too aggressively for the future and wanted to protect the present reign. The strategy had seemed defensive at first. In practice, it created two centers of command, two chains of loyalty, and two versions of what the king supposedly wanted. William stepped in when the argument became personal. He said the monarchy could not survive through rival courts hidden inside one family. Every office had to answer to a single coordinated structure, or private access would continue to overpower formal duty. The prince's words were calm, but they landed like a judgment. Charles revealed the final reason behind his choice through confidential public attitude reports. Catherine had become the institution's strongest source of emotional credibility. The reports showed that people trusted her restraint, steadiness, and sense of duty. Any painful transition, he believed, would be accepted more easily if she visibly shared responsibility. Camilla lifted her hand from the document and asked whether Charles understood what he had done to their family. He said he did. Then the king added that the first consequences had already begun outside the room. While they argued behind closed doors, staff were receiving new orders, appointments were being frozen, and one royal household was about to discover that the old rules no longer applied. The monarchy changed before the public heard a single word. Phones rang across 3 royal residences. Engagement approvals stopped. Senior appointments were frozen. Staff members who had spent years navigating separate centers of influence were suddenly instructed to report through one command structure. The transfer was no longer a document hidden in a private chamber. It had become a living force, and its first impact was felt by people who realized, within minutes, that their access and authority had vanished. William issued the first order before leaving Windsor. Every major appointment, public announcement, and long-term engagement would be paused until the competing offices had been reviewed under the new joint authority. That authority meant he and Catherine now shared final control over daily royal operations. The freeze mattered because one rushed appointment could preserve the same private alliances Charles was trying to dismantle, while one careless announcement could expose the family's division before they were ready to explain it. Camilla returned to her rooms and found 2 staffing decisions waiting on the desk. An aide quietly informed her that neither could proceed without Catherine's approval. The queen consort dismissed everyone, closed the door, and sat alone without removing her coat. Hours earlier, people had acted on her instructions without hesitation. Now, even routine choices carried the reminder that her influence had been placed beneath another household's command. Catherine felt no victory. Her first official folder contained decisions affecting dozens of employees and several family members. She read each page until late evening, then told William that every signature felt like a judgment on someone they knew. The burden cut deeper, because these were not distant names. They were people who had served weddings, funerals, state visits, and private crises, often while carrying loyalties no document could fully reveal. Anne called before midnight. She offered neither congratulations nor sympathy. Through a private recorded conversation, the Princess Royal warned that authority became dangerous the moment its holder began enjoying it. Catherine absorbed the words and promised that the transfer would not become revenge, disguised as reform. William faced his own test during the first briefing. When an advisor called him the final decision-maker, he stopped the meeting and corrected the phrase. Catherine's approval carried equal weight under the instrument, he said, and no office would be allowed to ignore that fact. The reaction among senior courtiers was immediate. Several discussed resignation because the transfer ended their informal access to Charles and Camilla. Their panic confirmed the hidden truth. Private channels had become more powerful than official responsibility. Catherine made her first major decision by blocking the dismissal of a long-serving staff member targeted by one faction. She demanded a proper review. Then the review team found something worse. Records connected to the altered Commonwealth announcement had vanished from an internal archive. A private message arrived from Charles moments later. He asked Catherine to meet him alone, without William or advisors. There was one truth, he wrote, that he could not reveal in front of the others. The machinery of the crown had accepted Catherine's command, but the king's confession would decide whether she could still accept the man who had placed it in her hands. Without William beside her and without officials controlling the conversation, Catherine no longer faced the sovereign. She faced an aging father-in-law who had made a decision so severe that it threatened his marriage, his authority, and his relationship with his son. Charles stood near the unlit fireplace and confessed that the transfer was not only designed to save the monarchy from internal rivalry, it was also his attempt to prevent William from inheriting the same loneliness that had shaped his own life. Charles asked her to sit, but she remained standing. She wanted one answer before anything else. Why had he given her equal authority, instead of placing the full burden on William? The crown, he said, had always isolated the heir by forcing one person to absorb every family conflict, every institutional failure, and every private betrayal alone. By naming Catherine as an equal partner, he hoped to create shared duty rather than solitary sacrifice. Catherine looked down at the delegation seal and ran her thumb across its raised edge. The seal, the official mark confirming that a royal document carries the sovereign's authority, now felt heavier than the paper beneath it. She admitted that she had first believed Charles was using her as protection against Camilla, the courtiers, and anyone who might resist the transfer. That fear mattered, because accepting power without genuine trust would make her a shield, not a partner. Charles did not deny everything. Through the private recorded conversation, he acknowledged that he needed Catherine's credibility, composure, and public trust. Yet he insisted that she also deserved real authority. For years, she had carried responsibility without always holding the power to shape the decisions behind it. He would not ask her to defend a system while denying her the ability to repair it. Charles then spoke about William. He had watched his son become more guarded whenever family conflict intensified. The prince's loyalty, once his greatest strength, could become paralysis if everyone pulled him in a different direction. Power without partnership might harden him, isolate him, and turn duty into the same emotional prison that had shaped his father. Catherine finally asked about the missing records. Charles revealed, through a documented private account, that he had ordered copies removed from the General Archive and secured them himself. The correspondence named several family members and advisors. If released, it could destroy relationships that might never recover. Catherine made her decision. She would keep the correspondence sealed and reject revenge disguised as transparency. But the conduct behind it would still be addressed through formal restructuring. Silence would protect private relationships. Reform would protect the crown. Catherine then told Charles she would accept the role fully, but only if he stopped calling the transfer a surrender. It was an act of trust, she said, and trust required him to stand publicly beside them. Charles asked whether she could forgive the shock he had caused. She answered that forgiveness would depend on what they did next, then invited him to announce the decision together. By morning, the transfer would leave the safety of private rooms and face a public that had never seen the crown divide power this way. At 9 o'clock, the palace statement appeared. Within minutes, broadcasters abandoned their schedules, newspaper editors tore up prepared front pages, and crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace. Britain had not been told that Charles was abdicating, nor that William had become king. The announcement was stranger and more dramatic. The sovereign remained, but control of the monarchy's daily future now belonged jointly to the Prince and Princess of Wales. The country struggled to name what it had just witnessed. Charles remained king, but the statement confirmed that William and Catherine would now direct the royal household's operations, long-term strategy, senior appointments, and the coordination of working family members. The Prince and Princess of Wales, the titles held by the heir and his wife, had moved from preparation into practical command. That mattered because the public face of the reign would still belong to the monarch, while the decisions shaping its future would now be made by the next generation. The first evening edition appeared beneath one enormous headline: "The Crown Shares Power." Its front page showed Catherine leaving Windsor with a controlled expression, while Charles stood several steps behind her. The image spread quickly, because it captured the confusion at the heart of the announcement. She looked composed, yet the distance between them made the transfer appear colder and more final than the palace statement intended. A national presenter called the arrangement the most dramatic internal transfer of royal authority in the modern era, during a live broadcast. Constitutional commentators debated whether Britain was witnessing renewal or a concealed crisis. Outside Buckingham Palace, hundreds gathered along the gates. Some carried photographs of Charles. Others held messages supporting William and Catherine. Their views were divided, but their mood was united by one feeling. History had shifted without warning. Catherine watched the coverage from Kensington Palace until one commentator accused her of ambition. She switched off the television and asked William whether silence would look like guilt. The question cut deeply because she had accepted authority to protect the institution, yet the public could easily mistake restraint for calculation. William refused to let suspicion define the moment. He proposed a brief joint appearance with his father, not to explain every private detail, but to prove there had been no coup, coercion, or family overthrow. Charles agreed. Camilla made the harder choice. Despite her private hurt, she agreed to stand beside the king. Her presence would prevent the appearance from looking like a complete household fracture, even though the distance between her and Catherine revealed how much remained unresolved. Charles stepped forward first, then deliberately gestured for William and Catherine to join him at equal distance. She hesitated for 1 second before moving into place. That pause captured everything: shock, burden, acceptance, and the knowledge that retreat was no longer possible. The appearance calmed the country, but not the family. The cameras captured unity. The final verdict would come later, behind closed doors, when they faced what the transfer had taken from them, and what it might still save. When the palace doors closed after the public appearance, no applause followed the family inside. There was only silence, exhaustion, and the knowledge that none of them could return to the roles they had occupied the day before. Charles had surrendered control, but not his identity. William had gained authority without receiving the crown. Catherine had entered the crisis stunned and uncertain, yet emerged carrying a responsibility no previous Princess of Wales had been asked to hold in the same way. Charles joined Camilla, William, Catherine, and Anne for one final private meeting without advisors. The room held no competing secretaries, no courtiers, and no separate household voices. A royal household is the staff and offices supporting each senior family member, and the transfer would mean nothing if those offices simply formed new rival camps. Every person at the table agreed that the old struggle for access had to end. Catherine placed the original delegation instrument in the center. She said it would never be treated as a weapon, a trophy, or proof that one side of the family had defeated another. The document had transferred operational authority, but it did not grant permission for revenge. Her words mattered because the monarchy could survive a change in command. It could not survive if power became personal punishment. Camilla broke her silence through a recorded private family conversation. She admitted that the method had wounded her and that learning the truth after others had already acted felt like rejection. Yet the queen consort also accepted that the previous structure had allowed advisors to turn personal access into institutional influence. She agreed to support the unified household, not because the pain had disappeared, but because preserving the family required ending the machinery that had divided it. Charles finally released the fear he had carried alone. Holding every thread, he said, had become less important than making sure those threads did not break. The king remained sovereign, the person who formally carries the crown and performs its highest state duties. But daily control no longer had to remain trapped in his hands. He had chosen continuity over pride. William promised that the new authority would not erase his father's reign. It would protect him from constant factional battles and allow him to focus on duties only the monarch could perform. The prince would lead the machinery, but he would not pretend the crown already belonged to him. Charles then lifted the pen used to sign the transfer. He held it for several seconds before handing it to Catherine. She looked at it, then placed it beside William. The gesture settled the meaning of the entire crisis. The responsibility belonged to both of them. Catherine had never feared leadership itself. She feared what power would do to every relationship around her. Yet refusing it would have left the future shaped by rivalry instead of responsibility. Charles did not cease to be king. William did not seize the throne. Catherine did not triumph over the family. The transfer became controlled renewal, painful, humbling, and necessary. It exposed hidden divisions, wounded pride, and forced honesty before crisis became collapse. The moment began with Catherine staring in disbelief at a signature. It ended with her understanding its true meaning. Charles had not handed her the monarchy as a reward. He had entrusted her with the duty of keeping it whole. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.